Who even talks about socializing with relatives these days? I have no intention of doing that. Let me tell you at this point. I don't want any involvement anymore. The first child was born to my eldest son. On the day we went to see the baby, right there, my husband and I were thrown those words by our daughter-in-law. However, a month later, she appeared before us again, dressed in tatters. My baby is sick. In response to her words, I repeated back what she had said to me. Isn't it your child? Not our grandchild. Seeing her turn bright red, I had to suppress a laugh. My name is Sarah, and I'm 73 years old. I've been married to my husband Mark for 45 years. Back then, I was 27. I met my husband at the company I worked for after graduating from high school. Mark is 2 years older than me. I always thought of him as just a senior colleague until he asked me out, and we ended up together. I'm generally a reserved person, and before meeting my husband, I had no experience dating men. At that time, the average age for women to get married for the first time was 24. My friends, relatives, and even my younger sister all got married in their early 20s, and I felt increasingly anxious as they all tied the knot. I even considered arranged marriage, but those attempts failed. I feared I might end up alone forever, but no matter what, I believed work would never betray me. With that mindset, I dedicated myself to my job. Thanks to that, by the time I was 27, I was earning a decent salary and handling various tasks. I believe my juniors admired me. Perhaps my boss gave me so many opportunities because he thought I wouldn't get married. So when I announced my marriage to Mark, everyone was quite surprised. The company tried to persuade me to stay, and I became part of a dual-income couple. Shortly after getting married, I gave birth to our first son, Henry. It wasn't an era where I could rely on maternity leave, so I juggled work and childcare with help from my mother-in-law. Even after our second son, Keith, was born, my life didn't change much. Still, I loved my children and felt the same way about my husband. My mother-in-law never showed any displeasure and supported my work. She was truly a wonderful mother-in-law. When she fell ill, I retired to take care of her, feeling it was my turn to repay the favor for all her help. Caring for her wasn't hard at all. If anything, I was glad to be able to give back to her in her final days. After her funeral, the house felt quite lonely. Time passed, and about 6 years ago, we received great news. Our second son, Keith, was getting married. His partner was a woman his age, named Jasmine. They met at work, just like Mark and me. I was overjoyed. I hoped we could live together so I could be a good mother-in-law to her, just like my mother-in-law was to me. However, Keith said, "My brother will inherit this house, right?" and decided to move out. We gave Keith a piece of land we owned nearby, though it wasn't as large as this one. Keith and Jasmine were happy and built a house there. It's a wonderful home, spacious enough for a family. Jasmine always said, "Please feel free to visit anytime." I know not to take her words too literally, but I was delighted Keith had found such a lovely partner. 2 years after their marriage, they had their first child. A very healthy baby boy. Then they had a baby girl soon after. Keith, as the head of the family, has been supporting them well, and seeing him mature makes me rely on him too. 5 years after Keith's marriage, our eldest son, Henry, followed suit. Exactly a year ago, Henry got married. At that time, he was 41 years old. We had begun to wonder if he would ever get married, but when he did, Mark and I were greatly relieved. His partner was a woman named Maria. She was 7 years younger than him, but already in her mid-30s, a mature woman. There was nothing to worry about. With our children successfully moving on with their lives, Mark and I believed we could now enjoy a peaceful retirement. The first issue that arose with Henry's marriage was their living arrangement. Of course, we didn't mind them living with us. This house was intended to be his eventually, and he probably thought so too. After discussing this again, Mark told Henry. However, since you're newlyweds, Maria might feel uncomfortable. It will cost money. But I think you should try living together on your own for a while. We lent them an apartment we had previously bought as an investment for less than half the market rent and furnished it as a wedding gift. They started their new life there. However, our home remained their primary residence, so they returned for Christmas. I was so happy that the whole family could celebrate Christmas together and eagerly prepared the meal. On Christmas Eve, Henry and Maria arrived first. "Welcome back. Was it cold outside?" I greeted them as they entered, their breaths visible in the cold air. Mark was relaxing in the living room. As we talked about having a drink and eating turkey together, Maria looked around the room. "Maria, what's wrong? Come sit with us." They had only been married for a short time. I thought she might be feeling out of place and invited her to join us. "No, it's just..." She looked up at the ceiling. "Is that a stain up there?" "What?" I followed her gaze. "Oh, you're right. I hadn't noticed it." Maria then moved to inspect the walls. "There's a scratch here too." "Oh, that. Henry and Keith made that when they were little." I explained with a laugh, recalling how the boys had tried to cover up the scratch by standing in front of it, and how they eventually got caught and scolded. It was a story from when Henry was in early elementary school. Having a daughter-in-law is wonderful. It allows us to reminisce about the old days over small things like this. As I touched the old scratch fondly. "How much do you think it would cost to fix this?" I froze at her words. "And that stain too. You're not marking their heights on the columns, are you?" "What?" I could only stare at Maria, unable to comprehend what she was saying. "This house is going to Henry, right? If we want to sell it, it needs to be in good condition." Her words seemed innocent enough. I wanted to yell, "What are you saying?" but I learned that when shock reaches its limit, you can't say anything. "Sarah." "Maria." Mark's voice interrupted our conversation, and we rejoined him and Henry. "What were you talking about?" Maria smiled at Henry's question. "We were looking at the scratches Henry and Keith made when they were being mischievous." Mark and Henry smiled, reminiscing. Having heard what she said earlier, I couldn't muster a smile. Unaware of my feelings, the three of them continued laughing. "Maria, here you go." Mark offered her a beer. "Oh, Dad." Henry stopped him. "Actually, Maria is pregnant." "What? Really?" Mark and I exclaimed simultaneously. "Oh, congratulations." They had just gotten married this year. We didn't expect them to have a child so soon. This happy news brought a smile to my face. Maybe she was more sensitive to details because she was pregnant. There probably wasn't any deep meaning behind her earlier words. My desire to be a good mother-in-law to her covered up the distrust I had started to feel. Later, Keith and his family also arrived. We enjoyed the roast beef Keith had brought, had a wonderful Christmas, and once the new year began, things returned to normal. While hanging up the laundry, I noticed my breath was white from the cold. It was a cold year. I found myself thinking about my pregnant daughter-in-law. At Christmas, Henry mentioned that she wasn't feeling well. A first pregnancy can be emotionally challenging. During such times, my mother-in-law had listened to me and helped with chores. Feeling a sense of duty, I finished the laundry and went to the kitchen. I decided to make some vegetable soup and meatloaf for Maria, so she could easily reheat it for dinner. I planned to add a salad to make the meal more complete. To avoid imposing, I called her before cooking. "Hello, Maria. How are you feeling?" She answered after a few rings. "Fine." Her tone was cold, but I humbly continued to gauge her needs. Being pregnant makes it hard to do chores and cook, right? "Let me know if you need any help." "Uh-huh." Her reply was non-committal. "Would you like me to make extra dinner and bring it over?" "Only if it wouldn't be a bother." I asked cautiously. She didn't respond. Thinking she might find it hard to refuse, I also fell silent. "Sorry, I thought I could help, but if it's a bother, I'll stop for today." I was about to end the call when she finally spoke. "No, please do." Her clear response made me happy to be needed. "Got it. I'll bring it over soon." I replied enthusiastically and went straight to the kitchen. "Are you already preparing dinner?" my husband asked. "I'm taking it to Henry and Maria. She's pregnant, and doing chores must be tough for her." Mark smiled happily at my explanation. I packed the soup, meatloaf, and salad into containers. It was quite heavy. Seeing that I was planning to take the bus, Mark offered to drive me. I asked him to wait in the parking lot of their apartment. Having father-in-law around might make Maria more uncomfortable than me coming alone. We didn't want to be a burden. At the apartment entrance, I pressed the number for their unit and headed to my son's place. I rang the doorbell, and without a word, the door opened. "Maria, sorry for the sudden visit. Here, I brought some food for you and Henry." I handed her the bag with the containers. She took it silently. "Are you feeling unwell? If cleaning or anything is too much, please rely on us." "Uh-huh." Her response was vague. "All right then, I'll head back. Mark is waiting for me downstairs." She gave a brief nod and closed the door. I felt a bit sad. I came on my own, but I had called and asked first. I didn't expect thanks, but a bit more interaction would have been nice. Feeling uneasy, I returned to the parking lot where Mark waited. "Did Maria appreciate it?" he asked happily. Not wanting to worry him, I smiled and replied, "Yes." That night, my phone rang. It was Henry. I thought he was calling to thank me for the food, so I answered cheerfully. "Hello, Henry? Mom. What were you thinking?" He shouted right away. "What? What's wrong? You gave Maria a bunch of stuff she can't eat. Was this some kind of joke?" I was shocked. "I never intended that." "Wait, calm down. That wasn't my intention at all." Henry was furious on the other end of the line. Seeing my distress, Mark took the phone from me. "Henry. What happened? Tell me clearly." Thanks to my husband, Henry calmed down and began to explain. Mark listened silently. After the call ended, I looked at Mark, seeking answers. "The food you brought had eggs in it. The meatloaf had eggs, right?" Mark's words made me tilt my head in confusion. "What?" "Yes, I used eggs. But Maria isn't allergic to eggs. She ate the omelet I made." I told my husband. I had checked for allergies with both my daughters-in-law before they got married, as they would be eating at our house occasionally and I wanted to be careful. "No, it's not an allergy. She says eating eggs during pregnancy can cause the baby to develop an egg allergy. And she also avoids raw vegetables because they might have bacteria." Mark said, looking troubled. "That can't be true. I've heard such stories, but they are just myths. Anyway, Henry wants you to apologize to Maria." I couldn't accept it. But the thought of her being pregnant held back my anger. "All right. I'll call her," Mark said. "No, actually, she doesn't want to hear your voice. Henry said to send a message. Also, he said if you really want to help, just give them money. Because what she can eat changes daily." Mark said reluctantly. "It might be true." I nodded, feeling a bit guilty. That night, I sent an apology message to her. "From now on, I'll let you know if I need help with chores. It would be helpful if you could transfer about $50 for that day's dinner." I reluctantly agreed. I meant well but failed. It's probably best not to offer unnecessary help. From then on, I tried to assist in ways that matched her wishes and limited my contact. Whenever there was an issue, I used messages instead of calls. Sometimes she would ask for money for dinner or to hire help for cleaning. Each time, I sent the money, but eventually, I just gave them a lump sum to use as needed until the baby was born. Still, I worried about my grandchild. As the due date approached, I anxiously waited for news. But even after the due date passed, there was no contact. I refrained from reaching out, knowing that Maria herself must be anxious. About 10 days past the due date, I received a call from Jasmine. "Sarah, has Henry's baby been born?" She was likely preparing to celebrate. "No, there's been no news yet. I don't want to add pressure by reaching out, so I'm just waiting," I replied. Jasmine said. "But their hospital induces labor if it's more than a week past the due date. Maybe it hasn't happened yet?" Her words made me worry. Was it a difficult labor? Or was there a postpartum issue? Unable to wait any longer, I messaged Henry. "How is Maria doing?" The message was read quickly. It must have been his lunch break. Maria? She's doing well. I felt relieved. I thought it might be a difficult labor, but I'm glad to hear she's okay. However, the next message shocked me. Didn't I tell you it was a very easy birth? It's almost been a month. You should come visit soon. What is he talking about? A month? What about a month? I pondered while holding my phone. Unable to comprehend the message's meaning, I spoke to Mark. The baby was already born? With Mark's words, I finally understood. The baby had been born a month ago. Though the most important thing was that the birth went smoothly and both mother and child were healthy, couldn't they have informed us? I contacted Jasmine. She, too, froze for a moment, thinking, what? Anyway, since the baby was born, I needed to give them a gift, so I reached out to Maria. I heard the baby was born safely. Congratulations. I'd like to bring you a gift. Is it all right to visit soon? Maria replied to my message. I'm not feeling well. Please send it by registered mail. Are you unwell? Are you okay? All right, I will send it. And if possible, could you send a photo of the baby? Despite my mixed feelings, I restrained myself. No, it's not your grandchild, it's my child. But that response pushed me to my limit. What a nerve she had. Until now, I had overlooked things because she was pregnant. But it seemed she had used her pregnancy to distance herself from me. We've been supporting you throughout her pregnancy. We have the right to hold our grandchild, my husband told Henry. Thanks to that, we were finally allowed to visit our grandchild. We agreed to visit once the baby's 1-month checkup confirmed everything was fine. Despite my feelings toward her, I was genuinely excited to meet my grandchild. The day arrived. Instead of sending the gift, we decided to bring it. I feared that sending it might give them an excuse to avoid us. On the promised day, my Mark and I headed to the apartment where Henry and his family lived. Excuse us. It had been a long time since I last visited this apartment. Unlike before, the sound of a baby crying brought a smile to my face. Congratulations, Maria. She thanked us curtly. She was holding the baby tightly. My husband smiled and chatted with Henry. I approached the baby. I peeked at baby's face. She's adorable. I couldn't help but say it. They named the baby May. What a sweet little girl. Mom, have a seat. Henry said to me. I sat down next to Mark on the sofa and pulled out a package from my bag. Oh, and here's the gift. This is from us, and this one is from Keith. Jasmine delivered it to us for you. Henry. Make sure to thank Keith for this. I smiled at Henry and then looked at Maria. But she didn't smile back. Take it back. Her words froze the room. Who even talks about socializing with relatives these days? I have no intention of doing that. Both Mark and Henry were equally stunned by her words. But Keith and Jasmine wanted to celebrate. I tried to smooth things over. Celebrate? You just told us to thank them for the gifts. If it were purely for celebration, there'd be no need for thanks, right? If it's just out of obligation, we don't need it, and we don't need to see you again. Let me be clear. I don't want any involvement from you anymore. It seemed nothing I said would matter to her. I decided to stop expecting anything from her. I stood up calmly. You're right. My words were wrong. You don't need to thank us. This is a genuine gift for May from us and from Keith's family. Both Mark and Henry looked at me. We will no longer involve ourselves with you. I'll tell Keith the same. Do your best on your own. Maria responded. That's our plan. Besides, you were the ones interfering from the start. Unbelievable. Did she forget who helped them afford such a prime apartment? And all the support during her pregnancy. All right, we won't provide any more assistance. Sorry for meddling. Mark, looking troubled, scratched his head and stood up beside me. Let's go home. Yes. Henry remained silent. He seemed unable to speak against Maria, who wore a triumphant smile. How pathetic. We'll manage on our own, so don't expect any care or support from us either. Right, Henry? Prompted by Maria, Henry replied, yeah, that's right. We can't do caregiving, maybe ask Keith. Had my son abandoned me too? The thought filled me with bitterness. But I couldn't say anything more. Mark and I left the apartment in silence. In the end, I never got to hold May. I told Jasmine, who was visiting with her kids, about what happened. She got angry on my behalf. Her support made me feel much better. I had doubted myself before, but she reassured me, you did nothing wrong, Sarah. Just then, Mark came home. He had been out somewhere. Welcome back. Where did you go? I asked. To the real estate agency, he said. The real estate agency? Why? He smiled. I asked if we could raise the rent on that apartment to market rate. He said. I was surprised. He hadn't shown much anger, but clearly, he had strong feelings about this. Jasmine laughed, saying, nice move, Mark. We gave them a break because they're family, but now they're not. They'll get the notice in a few days. I hadn't expected him to act so quickly. Henry and Maria would surely be shocked by the notice. I hoped they would reflect on their actions. For the next month, we lived as if we had forgotten about Henry and Maria. Neither Keith's family nor my husband mentioned them at all. Thanks to this, I was able to gradually forget the frustrating and upsetting things that had happened. One day, we planned to go out to eat with Keith and his family. Of course, since we invited them, we intended to cover the meal cost. Keith was supposed to pick us up, so Mark and I waited at home. The intercom rang. Oh, it looks like Keith and the family are here. I called out to Mark. He stood up at my words. I went to the door to greet Keith's family. Hi there. You got here quickly, I said as I opened the door. And then I froze. Standing there was not Keith's family, but my estranged daughter-in-law, Maria. Maria. I couldn't help but call out. Her usual cold demeanor was gone. She was dressed in old, worn-out loungewear, looking like she shouldn't be outside. She gazed at me with a truly distressed expression. Sarah. I was wrong. I'm so sorry. Tears welled up in her eyes as she collapsed to the ground. What do you want now? I asked. Hearing our voices, Mark came out of the room. He was surprised to see Maria kneeling before me but remained silent, standing behind me. May has been diagnosed with an illness. So now, I'm working to pay for her treatment. But with the rent increase, we can't even afford to eat. Please, can you at least revert the rent back to what it was? Her tears shocked me. An illness? May. I quickly knelt in front of her. Maria nodded repeatedly, wiping away tears. I see. That's terrible. I stood up. But I'm sorry. We're about to go out for dinner, so could you leave? What? Maria looked at me with her mouth agape. Yes, it's tough. Do your best. You and Henry need to support May. Wait a minute. Maria glared at me. I say your grandchild is sick and you don't want to help. She was getting defensive. In response, I repeated the words she had once said to me. Isn't it your child? Not our grandchild. Handle it yourselves. Maria turned bright red. I almost laughed at the sight. What a disgraceful parent. Using her child's illness as a ploy for money. I knew she was lying. Just a few days ago, my sister, Henry's aunt, had called me without knowing the situation. I saw Henry. He said his wife and baby are doing well. He complained that his wife just lies around and doesn't do any housework. But with a newborn, it's understandable, she had said casually. But how could it be that in just a few days, there's suddenly an illness? And that they're working but have nothing to eat? She's an incredibly greedy person. Of course, my husband was aware of this too. Clearing his throat, he addressed Maria. By the way, this month's rent is still unpaid. If you can't pay, you'll need to move out. Could you inform your husband about this? Maria turned pale. The rent in that area is quite high. It would be challenging for them to continue living there on Henry's salary. Sooner or later, they would have to move out. Then, what about this house? It's supposed to be Henry's. Maria started to panic. That was the plan. But we don't owe anything to a son who has cut ties with us. If you sold it, it would dishonor our ancestors. Keith and his family will live here. I said calmly. I no longer intended to give this house to Henry. When I told Keith's family about this, they offered to rent out their current home and move in with us, saying it would be easier for us as we got older. We invited them to dinner to discuss this plan in detail. Maria started yelling, "That's unfair. It's not right." She had been the one to sever ties, so who was really being unreasonable? What's going on? Looking up, I saw Keith standing there. He looked surprised to see Maria. "Why are you here? If you're here to trouble our parents again, please leave," Keith firmly told her. "Mom, Dad, let's go." With that, we locked the door and prepared to leave. "Wait, Sarah. I'm sorry, but I'm no longer your mother-in-law." I left her there and got into Keith's car. When they had declared the break in relations, it had hurt and angered me. But now that we had severed ties from our side, I felt a sense of relief. Later, during dinner, Mark's phone rang with a call from Henry. He looked at it and turned off his phone. Henry couldn't even correct his wife's mistakes. What a pitiful man. He would likely be under her thumb for the rest of his life. Since we refused to take their calls, Henry and Maria tried to negotiate a rent reduction through the realtor, but we had no intention of complying. After they defaulted on rent for 4 months, we issued an eviction notice. They loitered around our house for a while, complaining, so we consulted the police, who gave them a warning. This area is too expensive for them to afford on Henry's salary. They likely moved to some far-off place, facing a long commute. It can't be helped. It's not easy for a man over 40 without a position to find a new job. Meanwhile, Keith's family moved into our home. Their house quickly found tenants, generating enough rental income to cover their mortgage and even provide a profit. With many rooms, our now large family enjoys lively and joyful days together. This fall, our eldest grandchild will start 1st grade. Time flies. There are many backpack colors available now. Our grandchild chose green. My husband and I are looking forward to giving it as a gift.